welcome to the Progressive American. I know it's been a while. I've been working on some video essay projects, particularly a response to Kevin Ferris. But today I have PhilosoShy here with me, and today we're going to be discussing some of the unusual things that Jordan Peterson has really done and has continued to do both online and in his commentary in general. So,
Uh,
PhilosoShy, welcome to the show.
well, thanks for having us back again. It's great. This is a long time coming, and
Oh yeah,
it's been interesting to see that Jordan Peterson has actually been getting worse at an
yes,
accelerated rate, like every day worse than he was worse the previous day,
yeah.
for the last like couple months. So we've got a lot of content now, as we recall. You know, a
Oh
whole
my God.
entire yeah,
You
like
were I remember just going through my Discord and I'm like, "Oh Lord, he sent me more stuff."
well,
Because Jordan
every
Peterson,
day,
it's
every
like
day.
every day. Because the thing about that I kind of want to emphasize in this conversation, and we'll probably get to it, is that Jordan Peterson has always been kind of unhinged. He's always been a crazy person. He's always been very like inclined to take the most extreme positions for his analysis. There's a whole.
So So we actually we would like to slightly disagree with it, and this is part of the episode that we actually wanted to bring
Yeah.
up is so once upon a time when we were younger and a little bit more impressionable or whatever, and before we understood the jargon and the lingo, we thought that Jordan Peterson was highly well educated and intelligent, and he is highly educated, he's quite intelligent, but most, as we now know, most of his jargon, most of his lingo is quite meaningless. It's very
Yes.
much a word salad. But even that requires a degree of education to make that believable. And he used to be able to keep that really good, and then he went off to Russia for an illegal procedure to be put into a medically induced coma for like an entire month or whatever, which was considered an extremely dangerous procedure already that was not allowed in America, and that's why he went to Russia to get it. And we're not saying like, oh, Jordan Peterson's been, brainwashed by the Russians or whatever. We're saying we think that non-FDA approved procedure that he did to cheat his way out of his own benzo addiction, despite the fact that he has made his entire career off of self-help books that demand that you take responsibility for your own addictions and do it the hard way. We think that illegal procedure damaged him deeply, and ever since then, we have noticed a marked increase in his unhingedness.
Oh yeah, and
He was always a bigot, but
yes,
he
that's
wasn't
that's what I
quite
was trying to say.
unhinged like he is now.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying that like there isn't a decline in his approach and his conduct. That's very clear. Just like we said this off air earlier, was like it's gonna be like every day something crazy he's going
Oh
to
yeah.
do. Like for example, one of the things I have in my doc here is this weird need to mock concern for the public health in any capacity. So whether it's climate change, whether it's concerns about food,
Women's rights. Even
women's rights.
Michaela chastised him like recently
Oh
about
yeah.
a statement that he made that was so sexist even she couldn't like
What was the
abide
one
by
that?
it.
What was that one?
It was some woman who was super anti-rights or something like that, and we don't specifically remember. We'd have to look at it. It just all blends into the background, which we suppose is a good way of segueing into that. This is probably just the first of many, because as we said before, we even started this, is it is highly likely, incredibly likely, as a matter of fact, that he will say something truly disgusting during the duration of this interview. Also, the statement, it was H. Pearl Davis. H.
Yeah,
Pearl
that the
Davis
one we were
said,
talking about earlier.
Pearl Davis said, outside of reproduction, society would function fine without women. And Jordan B. Peterson responded, but who would keep the decorative pillow manufacturers in business? And Michaela Peterson responded, his own daughter, your business would definitely take a hit, Dad. This is a resentful woman who hates other women. Tells them that they're useless after 35 and continues to propagate red pill lies. Just because the left is crazy doesn't mean people like this aren't. So we can see a little infighting there on their
Yes.
sides, but also we can see where even he's been starting to get so socially unacceptable that even his own daughter is telling him like you've got to calm the hell down here. So
Yeah, and to also kind of to address one of one of the commenters, excuse me, I have a bit of a cough. One of the things that I think kind of is addressed in like the way he talks is basically an attempt to attack liberalism, and because he sees it as this growing evil. You kind of hear this with his like phrase that like postmodern neo-Marxists are taking over academia, and they're really totalitarian, which is just a rehash of the cultural Bolshevism Nazi shtick. So I think part of the thing to like really look at Jordan Peterson is that you need to be able to frame his rhetoric as an attack based in nothing. If you get people
especially
to
considering that he's acknowledged multiple times that he does not know what communism is, that he has never read any of Marx's works, that he has never read any of any of the primary communist doctrines or anything like that. So he's actually attacking nothing. He's attacking the straw man based off of his ignorance.
yes, and to kind of segue into one of the examples, I'm not sure if share screen will work, so I'm just not going to do it right now. But there was a post where the Toronto Star was talking about the need for Canada to address heat death, heat deaths caused by climate change and wildfires. And
Yeah,
Jordan Pearson proceeded to post, and you know this, a picture of the Joker and him going crazy and
because he's
saying,
obsessed with the Joker.
"Yeah, he's
Yeah.
obsessed with the Joker." I don't know what the deal is with that.
We don't know
Um,
what the clown obsession is. Yeah,
that's an
that's a
unusual
weird
thing.
one. Yeah, and he only started it kind of recently too. So
It's a bit of an unnerving thing. And
yeah,
he basically said because fire deaths are or heat deaths are such a big concern, and statistically, like they're not as bad as say in the United States or in Mexico, but the fact of the matter is that his approach in just posting that or talking about it like that is to me an attempt to get his audience to not look forward. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but it
it's
seems to
also an
me,
appeal to science denial. It's an appeal
yeah,
to science and reality denial. We went about 10 years ago, we went up to Alaska to do landscaping for a summer. And a lot of people, Jordan Peterson should know this, he's a Canadian, but a lot of people aren't really aware. But the sun does not go down during the summer in Alaska. It just doesn't go down. So you will, the sun will be pounding on you and it'll only be 70 degrees, but it'll feel 120 degrees because the sun is so direct. And you will pass out like and this is up in Fairbanks and Anchorage, like this
yeah,
is way above where the predominant amount of these heat deaths are. So once again, it really is just an appeal to emotional reality denial and science denial. The fact of the matter is, the more northerly or southerly your climb is, southerly below the equator, your climb is, the more extreme your swings are. Canada is not a blasted wasteland of snow and ice at least 4 to 5 months of the year. At
yeah.
which point it is, as a matter of fact, a verdant, constantly sunny, brilliant, bright wasteland or a bloomland that you will pass out if you spend 4 or 5 hours in the sun, which you will do without noticing because the sun doesn't work right. So your body can't send you the right signals to go rehydrate or get inside or go to sleep. And that's how it was in Alaska during the summer.
Yeah, and I think that the thing there for me is it comes in like the Trudeau government attempting to establish to the public like, hey, this is a concern. We know people have been hurt by this. So here's what we're going to do in terms of like a policy prescription in the long term. We have to think in the long term. And I think part of the problem with not only Jordan Peterson being incredibly um, unhinged is partly because of his worldview that he thinks that the world is either order or chaos, and that's it. Like this is why he starts. This is why he described Hitler as being motivated by the mark of Cain, which I wrote about as being an incredibly um, disastrous approach to historical methods, and Three Arrows did a really good video responding to him.
Yeah.
Um, but I think this worldview is particularly frustrating, and because it is appealing, like Raphael in the comment section just said, we we do have an element of this that is appealing because it allows people to ground themselves in something that they think is substantive but is not.
And there's also a degree in competitive authoritarian philosophy, which Jordan Peterson is very clearly a fan of, despite his statements against the against it, to the contrary. Um, he's creating something, and this applies to what Raphael is saying. Describe why he has a considerable sway and influence over impressionable young men. Well, these impressionable young men, have less experience than him, so he automatically has an imbalance of power there, and he is a psychologist, so again, he understands how these impressionable young men think, and their lack of functional comparative experience allows him to manipulate them and make them think that it's their idea. And he does that in a typical competitive authoritarian fashion of giving them physical things, of giving them people to hate and things to do and ways to clean their room and things that are simple and physical and seemingly applicable to the young men out there that feel like the rest of the world is all a world of, intangibles. He's the one who's trying to style himself in the physical, compete physically, become the strongest lobster. And
Yeah,
that appeals to less experienced, less educated individuals who want to proverbially and literally, as it were, take life into their own hands.
yeah, and like the whole clean your room thing, like that to me in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. Like if he had just wrote like a 12 rules for life and left it at that, I think it wouldn't be as harmful. But he had to do this weird thing to see as if this book and then the ideas behind it can cover everything. And the truth is, humans have been trying for a very long time to understand everything, and we probably never will. And maybe
But
it's
that's
just
no
the
excuse not to try.
oh, right, right. But when you're like creating a philosophy or a worldview for yourself, it has to be some element of skepticism of your own abilities and thought processes to improve to improve yourself and to change your worldview.
Right.
I was in this Marxist philosophy course last semester, and I really liked it because it a gave me an understanding of why I'm not a Marxist, but b why it is still interesting to look at Marxist philosophy and how other people abuse it.
Yeah.
But one of the things the professor taught us was this concept of looting ideas. You don't necessarily have to subscribe to the entirety of an ideology, but you can look at what they're saying in on say like alienation of labor. You can look
Right.
at that and then apply that to another philosophy and create an entirely new way of thinking. I don't really think Jordan Peterson is capable of that, or he's
No,
unwilling to do
certainly
that.
not. Well, because and no, we had an interview with Luciano Gonzalez Vegas a while ago, and we were talking about the nature of conservatism and how the political definition of conservatism is the political ideology to resist change and progress in
Mhm.
preference of older, more traditional ideals. And in preference of maintaining the status quo and the special rights and privileges to the already previously privileged classes, the upper classes, the aristocrats. And this is entirely standard and universal all the way back to the French Revolution, wherein the terms of conservatism and liberalism were kind of coined as we think of them today.
Yeah,
And so Jordan Peterson uh, will maybe talk later, or it's certainly in a different episode perhaps, about how Jordan Peterson certainly appears to be an aspiring cult leader, but more importantly is he's obviously a far right conservative. He obviously does not want these things to change. He already experiences so many rights and privileges. So if everybody else gets it, he feels like that's diminishing his special status.
and to kind of go back to like what we were mentioning earlier about his appeal to young people, his or young disaffected men, I do think to some extent that that desire to conserve, to fear change, is part of the reason why he lends himself to disaffected young men, because if those people ever like came to terms with themselves on their own without Jordan Peterson manipulating what they're talking about,
He wouldn't
what
have
they're going
anything
through.
to. Yeah, he wouldn't have anything anymore.
Well, he wouldn't have anything anymore, and I think he wouldn't be able to halt what he sees as the generation causing the change, creating the change. Because young people, generally speaking, tend to be more progressive. They tend to be open to newer things, and that I think is part of the reason why Jordan Peterson's message is so targeted. It is easier to try and like find the group within that group that is like small, unwilling to change, and just get them to like try and push back on change. Um,
So
and then
Raphael's got a good thingy here if you hadn't seen it.
yeah,
What we think would expose fundamental logical inconsistency in Jordan Peterson's philosophies. We think we're not exactly sure about questions because we're really horrible about asking questions. Instead, we like to point out facts. And the fact of the matter is that Jordan Peterson has a long history of hypocrisy, bigotry, and violence. And the logical inconsistencies of his philosophy are all of the logical inconsistencies that have to do with bigotry, namely and almost exclusively at the top being that they are simply untrue. That
yeah,
the things that Jordan Peterson says with the conviction that he says them and the absolute narrative that he tries to spin are statistically factually incorrect. You can go to Google, you can do a 5-minute Google search and find countless pieces of scholarly articles and various different pieces of evidence and research experimentation that all disprove basically everything that Jordan Peterson has ever published. And
yeah,
he himself, you said 12 rules for life or whatever. Even that book is full of, by and large, mostly discredited statements about self improvement, about the nature of consciousness, about assertion and
yeah.
sociability, etc. So we think the biggest thing that would expose the fundamental logical consistencies in Jordan Peterson's philosophies are simply that they are factually incorrect. They are he is if he is not lying to you, he is at least telling you a not true.
Yeah, and to kind of go off of that, I do think that's part of the reason why when Nathan Robinson posted an article in Current Affairs where he was talking about a Jordan Peterson fan or former Jordan Peterson fan who has now rejected him,
Right.
and interviewed that person. Jordan Peterson responded basically saying you to Robinson, that saying, "You basically don't matter to me. I'm totally not mad." Like that was kind of the approach he took in his tweets, and I think the part of the reason he responds like that is because he knows, at least partially through the way people take him down, that his philosophy is fundamentally flawed and full of nothingness and just empty-headed.
Well, and he
And
also can't respond to those kind of things.
no,
That's part of the cult leader, competitive authoritarianism kind of bent of his is you don't respond with anything well, like you never mattered, you're just bullshit. I need to now eject you publicly and verbally so that all of my followers can know that you're one of them.
right, and I think that kind of goes into a lot of this, like, and perhaps the online sphere incentivizes this a lot more than I've previously thought it has, because I've seen people who, for all intents and purposes, say really empty stuff, like we were talking about Pearly things, where she's talking about all the most horrible, heinous things about women that are based on nothing. There is no evidence whatsoever.
Right.
And yet she has seen a massive rise. She has over 1 million subscribers, and it's similar with Jordan Peterson. He is huge. He has a strong following.
And
And
they use specialized language designed to fool people who aren't as apt in the physical language or in
yeah,
the psychological sphere, especially.
yeah, 100%. And to go to the question of like him being like a cult leader, I'm wondering if you could kind of elaborate a little more on that, because a lot of times when people like say, "Oh, this person's acting like a cult leader," people will inevitably like kind of hesitate to accept that. So I was wondering if you could kind of go into it, because I'm pretty sure that like it's an apt description.
Well, so first and foremost, we are not using the colloquial term of cult leader. We actually have multiple series on multiple channels about the anatomy of cults, about how cults get their members, how they brainwash and program their members, how they keep their members, and how they make themselves appear suitable and socially acceptable to the outside world in much the same way as, the Mormon Church and the Scientologists have tried and largely failed to do over the course of the years because of their particular natures of extremism. So when we say that we believe that Jordan Peterson is an aspiring cult leader, we did not come to that conclusion, the decision to say that lightly. We actually resisted saying that he was a cult leader for about 5 years now, and then recently, only very recently, within the past like 6 to 8 months or what have you, would we say that he is spiraling into the aspiring cult leader field. Largely, our reasoning for that is his. There are a few of them, but and these are in no particular order. His continued and rising involvement in actual religious politics. He has many. He has many videos now directly addressing, the Catholic Church, Muslims, etc. He's also, what words do you think are buzzwords that Peterson? Oh man, we'll get to that one soon. He has so much specialized language, and that too is part of becoming a cult leader, is the use and development of specialized language, of propaganda, of the othering of people. So he, as mentioned before, somebody used to be a Petersonian and then stopped being a Petersonian, and his response was like, "Well, I don't need you anymore. Fuck you. You're not important.
Yeah,
Everybody in my following now knows that you're one of the enemy. You were never a Peterson supporter to begin with, and you never will be."
it was like that old Jilly Juice thing
And
too.
and there is a stunning, a hilarious amount of thought control that comes out of his mouth. There's a comical amount of videos where he's actually telling people how to think. That you should not think this way. You should think as I say. You should, view yourself as such. You should have an alpha personality, as so on and so forth. Always make sure to wear fresh clothes and so on. That's also behavior control. Long story short, especially over the last 6 to 8 months, year ish, about, he has been involving more and more classical aspects of cult conditioning and the bite model and other behavioral theories that revolve around cults and have for, at this point, centuries actually. So when we say he's an aspiring cult leader, we absolutely mean it's because he's using all of the cult jargon, and that includes buzzwords like, moralists and neo-Marxists and things like that, which we established much earlier in the interview. Neo-Marxist. Well, he's never read any, by his own admission, he's never read any Marxist literature because he believes it's evil and it's useless and so on. So he doesn't actually know what a neo-Marxist is. That's what makes it a buzzword. Um,
Yeah, and I will say like part of the issue for me is also like his red baiting, his approach to like pan everything as a Marxist threat. I think that plays very much into the whole cult leader mentality, because it portrays society at large as inherently threatening, as inherently evil, and like don't trust these
special
others.
special languages that marks the other, that easily and
Yep.
capably labels the other as some extreme fundamentalist faction. And this isn't just competitive authoritarianism; it's also fascist totalitarianism.
Hmm.
But both of them, as we think we said it in our previous interview with you, that they follow the same path and they take a quick turn at the end away from each other.
Oh yeah, and
So they have very much the same anatomy, and in this case, you may or may not have noticed, but every single fascist nation and ideology in history, ever since the founding of Mussolini's fascism, has had a main focus on stamping out communism.
yes.
Communism is their boogeyman that they use to rally the people around, and we see the exact same kind of rhetoric, the exact same kind of, bigoted rhetoric and cultural ideological rhetoric from Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, and just to kind of give off like to go into like the current affairs article, One of the things that the person who was like interviewed said was basically this quote, because if he's a genius, then why look into anything he says? He must be correct, unquote. That that I think is critical here. His use of buzzwords and his approach towards like everything being threatening is twofold. He wants you not to believe that he's incredibly intelligent and knows everything and can give you all the answers, which he can't. Uh
Wait, but that's also part of the cult mechanism. You
yes, and
need
then
all of the information must come from the leader.
yes, and he has this other, whether it's postmodern neo-Marxists, the moralists, whatever term he wants to use, and he also never addresses um, really what what his opponents are actually saying. This is why he got blown out by Zizek in that
Yeah.
debate. Um,
Because he doesn't actually have anything of substance to respond with. Yeah.
Yeah, and to go, and I think one of the things he does to identify this idea of the in group or the us is this phrase, that Western civilization phrase that has been
Yeah,
so
yeah,
thoroughly
yeah.
abused to the point where it doesn't really reflect reality. It never had. It never really did. It was a vast oversimplification. And he uses those oversimplifications in a way that he can control. And the
And
fact that the
he also calls on the normality of his own fan base. He
yes,
doesn't. That's one of the benefits of being a cult leader. You don't call your own people a buzzword. You
yes,
guys are normal. You're the normal ones. Everybody else is wrong. We, the us, that's just normal people. Those are just believers, or we believe recently he actually called them Petersonians on Twitter, and that's why we're calling
oh,
them.
jeez.
And so yeah, so we believe by his words the term as of the interview is Petersonians. He put that on a Twitter, and that's dangerous because that's changing your identity, maybe even changing your name, which is another part of behavior control. And so we'll see. Even calling yourself brother or sister or what have you is a change of identity in some way. It's not super intense, but he is naming his fandom now, so
Yeah,
that's concerning.
and also I think one of the things that is particularly frustrating for me is the environment of our media apparatus is just frankly broken, and that's
Oh
why
yeah,
someone like him can spread. Like we've seen, I've written about this before, but the destruction of local media and an increasingly sensationalized and weakened national media makes it so that people who can like make frustrated people feel like they have meaning can come in and basically say whatever they want without serious criticism, or in the case of some mainstream news outlets like the New York Times, they make a false equivalency between his position and that of the people who are correcting him. And I'm curious, what do you think can be done to kind of address that? Because it seems to me he still kind of gets away with it, and a lot of conservative media also does this.
well, first and foremost, we just need to know that as far as the media, quote unquote, goes, Fox News versus CNN versus MSNBC and so on and so forth. We've written a couple articles in the last couple of years about it, but at the end of the day, they really don't care who wins on the left or right. Fox News specifically has been caught time and time again lying, and even leaked documents from within their own offices have shown that they know that they're lying, and they don't care that they're lying, and that they would rather mislead the American people for the sake of money, for the sake of being viral, getting ratings, etc. No matter what happens, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, etc., they're all going to skim by. So we honestly believe the best thing is to continue to move forward with technology, to do what we're doing now, where smaller creators who are more interested in the facts because that's all they can give, throw statistics up, and we feel like as mentioned before, a huge part of Jordan Peterson's movement is the denial of science, the denial of statistics, the denial of reality, because it's all about what the leader says and so on. We believe, and that's of course why he did so much COVID denial and stuff like that. But we believe that the best thing you can do to inoculate against bigotry and ignorance is education and cosmopolitanism. Meet more people of different demographics as often as possible and learn everything about them, because as mentioned before, we don't really like to ask questions, why would Peterson do that? Because that will leave the Petersonian able to respond with a completely fallacious comment that we may or may not have something to. No, we would say, well, given Peterson's history, he would do that, given that he has done this many, many times before. Oh, one moment. What is the effective technique he uses to create these differences between what we believe and who is? What explains his audience's tolerance for denial of science, etc. Well, that's just cult mentality in general. Because being part of a cult involves information and thought control, Peterson can just tell his people they're lying to you and then make up a huge, 5-minute YouTube video about how they're lying to, all of which is a complete fabrication, of course, because he doesn't know anything about his ideological opponents. And then that is how he programs his audience to deny statistics and science and so on, because that could all be a neo-Marxist trap.
Yeah,
We're recalling in Shishin Lu's Three Body Problem. It's this amazing science fiction novel setting, but the first couple of chapters are literally just political dissidents and stuff like that, with huge, overwhelming political, they call them struggle sessions, where the scientists are being paraded up in front of millions of people and then viciously questioned. And anytime they respond with something scientific, their questioners and accusers just go and say, that's a reactionary capitalist, so on and so forth. And everybody eats it right up, because that's the wording, that's the programming. When we say that isn't true because that's a reactionary scientific, so on and so forth, that's the trigger word that makes everybody get really, really angry, and then they stop thinking about what's actually going on. And again, right back to cults, which is thought control. Maintain trigger words and special thought-stopping language that you can use at any given point in time.
yeah,
And in cults, the cultists will actually do this to themselves.
yeah. And I just want to kind of say, like, this is also really kind of true with other conservative commentators I've seen. Like
Right.
they'll play things, they'll say things like, "Oh, that's just some Marxist crap," or
Yeah.
"That's some Marxist nonsense," and it's like there is like, obviously there are problems with Marxist philosophy. I particularly am not a fan of his idea of a dictatorship of the proletariat. But
Well, and
I would also
we just don't personally think that a 150 years dead failed economist has any place in the modern day society's economy. So, we've never read anything that he's done, but we have read a lot of history about the man personally, and we know he was stuck in his house for 6 months once because he was so poor his wife had to sell his own pants.
yeah.
So,
So like
clearly he wasn't good at the economy then. Why would he be better at a considerably more advanced and complex economy, which we run now?
Yeah, and also but I would also say that, like, one of the things I've noticed is, going back to that philosophy professor I had. He started off with saying by saying things like, anybody who says Marx was wrong or right about everything is either an ideologue or an idiot. People exist in their context. Their arguments are presented um as like people with particular points based in the world that they live in. And if you want to say their X group of people is right or wrong, it's best to kind of look at, like, what exactly they are saying, why they're saying it, in what context they're saying that. And a lot of times when we see, like, conservative commentators like Peterson, they seem to gravitate towards the label of Marxist, but
Mhm.
never actually question the context in which Marxist thought has evolved over time, or even
And
where it goes.
to further that idea, before we get to Raphael's a good question here, we would like to continue that. Is, anybody who hears what we're saying and says, "Oh, that's just what a libtard neo-Marxist woke moralist would say," there is so little substance to that if they don't understand that, if those people saying that can't foresee us turning right back around and say, well, that's what a right wing, reactionary, not neo Nazi would say. If you can't see that kind of response coming from the people that you perceive as the left, you should invest some money into chess classes because you need to start thinking ahead. Because that's how little substance it actually has. Anybody can just snap back and forth with oh, you're just a Marxist, well, you're just a Nazi. But in actuality, if we're going to make any goods, we need to like what you called, picking and choosing out of the various different political philosophies, and that's what we as a gradualist moderate try to aim for. Let's go with things that work and then leave pretty much anything else behind.
Yeah, and pragmatism like is a really important approach, because if you get like caught up in one ideology or another, or the belief systems proposed by one philosopher over another, you're gonna end up having situations where people become like obsessed with that philosophy. They treat it like the gospel, when a lot of the, even with the gospel there are problems. Like it's one of those things where like people need to be more critical of themselves, and I really wish like more people would have this approach that, hey, I have limitations, let's see where I'm missing things. And that's one of the reasons I took that Marxist philosophy course, was because I was getting in a fight with Marxists, and I wanted to make sure I was not misrepresenting what they were saying. So I read it. I went
and
back.
and
I went back.
the greatest thing anybody can do to maintain their own education and moral and intellectual honesty and integrity is to change their mind. The
Yeah.
greatest thing you can do is change your mind. And on that note, let's go back to Raphael, because he's talking about helping people change their mind or changing people's minds. Do you two have any ideas or tactics to help Petersonians who begin to question Peterson's ideology to help them leave this cult-like situation? Um,
I can actually hit on that for a second.
Yeah,
Okay.
please do, because we don't really have a wording. Like, we have an answer, but we don't have a wording yet. So
Well,
go ahead.
firstly, I think it goes back to what was mentioned earlier about cosmopolitanism. A lot of times, people need to connect with the groups of people that they're supposed to be like hating in Peterson's framework. So, like, if you, I remember in college, one of the things I like had to do was talk with people who had completely different understandings of what the media was, what political philosophy was. And I ended up having a roommate that I may have mentioned a couple times on my Twitter. His name's Darby, and he's a friend of mine now. But he was a conservative, and he's still a conservative. But when we had to like room together, we were able to have conversations, and I'd explain, hey, this is X, Y, and Z, why somebody like me would think this way, and I don't think it's a fair representation of my argument or my position for you to say this, or X person. And he did actually really listen to me, and it was really nice to have those conversations. So I think if you can get people to like actually talk to them in person, or talk with them and disagree, you can get them to kind of acknowledge that, hey, that other that we have been told is so evil. We can actually have a civilized conversation. We can have humanity between each other. And I think once people get to that point, they start to realize that, hey, maybe this person I've been like listening to, like Jordan Peterson, might be a liar or misrepresenting or some things, or just doesn't understand what he's doing. But I think he's more like along the lines of a cult leader.
So, as for our side, we think so it's twofold. First of all, is the dishonest route. So and we want to say this because in proper Machiavellian fashion, like, we cannot always aim high. If we aim high and they aim low, they'll still be hitting us in the nuts all day. So we can't just stand around and let that happen, because it will inherently damage our side physically or intellectually. So the dishonest approach is this is acknowledging that this is a Petersonian who is more stuck in their ways, who is mostly on Peterson's side. The best thing you can do is to get to the people around them. The best thing you can do is to get to the people that they hang out with, who themselves are considered friends, might not be considered the in group, but are considered in enough that they can go, hey man, you're being a right jackass about X or Y. And sometimes it really does just take like your friend suddenly like snapping at you and being like, bro, that was fucked up. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
So that's what we kind of think of as like the deceptive way. Reach, if you want a Petersonian who's really stuck in their ways, but you don't think is lost, to see the light, as it were. have their friends appeal to them, appeal to their friends, appeal to their family, and so on and so forth. And if they have a good relation with those people, if those people are their friends and family, they will probably snap out of it. A much more preferable way is the more honest way about it, and that is this is interestingly enough, this is what we take with a lot of people who would by and large be considered very bigoted, including but not limited to like our neighbor, who's like everything phobic. Spend time with them. Eventually, they will become friends with you for the person that you are, and then you can ask them the very real question: do you think I'm like that? And that will make them very uncomfortable very fast. And you will find they will almost immediately go to the no, no, but you're cool. You're one of the good
Yep. Yep.
ones. And from there you can say, okay, so do you realize that now you've created a bad demographic and we're the standout, but I'm not, I one of the good ones and actually not special. I am quite the average for my demographic. This is what you more often see. So clearly, I am not one of the good ones. I am one of the average. Would you like to acknowledge that? Or alternatively, you can come out with me into my area now that you've known me, now that you've known I'm not dangerous. Because a lot of these people, that's what we see with Peterson and his hatred of the GSRM. He consistently calls them mutilators, groomers, pedophiles, rapists, so on and so forth. And the reason for this is to make sure that his people do not give us the chance. They do not go out, they don't find anything out. Those people are scary, horrible, inhuman monsters. But once they actually find out that we are not scary and human monsters, that means Jordan Peterson was wrong.
Yes.
Categorically, beyond a shadow of a doubt, beyond reasonable doubt, Peterson was wrong about one thing. And the cult leader, and we say cult, it feels like it's religious, but we mean political, religious, ideological, etc. There are even literal diet cults out there. So don't think about it as a purely religious thing. Any cult leader is constantly trying to keep their hand on the information control, because if they're wrong about one thing, they're not divine.
Yes.
They're not God if they're wrong about even one thing. And the moment that even one thing is wrong, the house of cards comes falling down. Before you know it, without personal self deception, that one thing that Peterson was wrong about becomes two things that Peterson was wrong about, which becomes four things that Peterson was wrong about. And then you are calling, before you know it, you're calling Jordan Peterson out on literally everything he said is bullshit.
Yeah,
Because wins.
and I would just like to also add that like one of the things that I think people need to remember is a lot of like cult like figures, they try to convince people that of the danger. There's an element of fear here. And I
Yeah.
think that's partially the reason Jordan Peterson himself is becoming more and more unhinged. And you mentioned this before we got on air, was this idea that like Jordan Peterson has become increasingly violent. And I
He
think part of
has
the
he has
issue,
been he has been calling for, trying to incite, and specifically threatening violence more and more every day.
yeah, and he's referred to like basically people who provide like trans affirming care as, and he posted something to the effect of jail is too good for you. Well,
They he
what is
also
good for them?
explicitly he also explicitly said at one point alongside that, we think before that, that they should be flogged in town square.
Jeez.
Yeah,
So
no, so it's bad. It's really, really bad. He's actually growing, and we do believe that call for violence, that increasingly unhingedness, is part of this illegal procedure, that damaged his brain. Because before he was at least better put together,
yes.
and now he's not.
Well, and I think that's partially because not just because of some medical issues, and I don't have any evidence to go into that because A, I don't have his medical records, and that would be weird. But B, I also
We are,
think that
of, we
they,
are of course only making assertions that we absolutely know to be true on the medical side of things.
yes,
So yeah,
yes. But I think part of this is directly related to his worldview. He views the world that like you need all these rules in order to prevent chaos. Well, what happens when the rules don't work? You have a chaotic world, you have chaos in your life, and you don't have control over yourself. And I think the problem is Jordan Peterson is deeply afraid of even the slightest loss of control. And that's not a healthy way to think. people need to be able to say, okay, I need help, or I'm having some trouble here. That there is an element of humanity that requires admission of vulnerability, and I think Jordan Peterson's worldview does not allow that.
Well, the competitive authoritarian worldview does not allow that, and the self-help worldview, like the field of self-help work that he does in particular, does not allow that. You have to always be getting better every single day, no back steps ever. And we see that in Jordan Peterson's own literature. If you do backstep, it's horrible. You're a failure. You know, you've made all of this. You need to get your shit together. Think of how shameful and embarrassing it is. You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah. And to kind of, I think like this is brought up by Raphael in the comment section. But that there these people are the people who are watching Jordan Peterson, listening to him, they're looking for a community to some extent. And it's
absolutely.
not and it's not just like Peterson, to be clear. There are left-wing communities that are very much like worship the video essayist, worship the debate bro. We see that online all the time.
All the
Um
time. Yeah.
and I think really I don't want to be the guy that says make them touch grass, but I do think to some extent getting people to say, "Hey, if you're so sure about this group, maybe you want to see them." Like we mentioned earlier, it's really getting people to recognize the humanity of their interlocutors. It's very hard to want to like throw away a person if you don't hate them. They need some element
That's
of
true.
hate to justify some of their worldview. And I
And
also
that's actually. Oh, sorry. Good job.
you're good. You're good. And this is where I look at Jordan Peterson's philosophy of everything being a battle between order and chaos as deeply dangerous because it creates paranoia. It maintains the fear. It maintains the hatred, and that is not a good way to look at anything. This is one of the reasons I really like reading history works because it requires me to look into like evidence, facts, claims, historical methods, schools of thought, the nuances between things rather than looking at somebody as inherently evil.
Yeah, definitely.
Except if it's the lost cause. The lost cause is evil.
Well, the lost cause is perpetuated by people who were bitter that they couldn't own other people. So,
Yeah.
there's that. And we think it's interesting that you say that Peterson is all about law versus chaos and everything. We're of the belief that that's just public. He's actually about authoritarianism versus liberty. He likes to say that without law we would all stretch down into chaos and so on and so forth, and but in actuality he himself is one of the most public people in his sphere about slapping down laws that would bring order and equity to less serviced communities. So he, despite the fact that right now the GSRM is in complete and total chaos, the GSRM is being regularly persecuted all around the world. People are attacking them literally in the streets. People are having stuff thrown at them. They're being called all sorts of slurs. You cannot tell us that is law and order. That is, for that demographic, complete and total chaos. But he wants that to be. Any law that tries to come out which gives them equal rights legally under the same jurisdiction as him, he does not want that. So we can't say logically that Peterson cares about law versus chaos. He cares about authoritarianism. He cares about his personal agendas being made into law, and then that's fine, because if his personal agendas are in law, then laws aren't bad because they're his.
Yes,
So
and to kind of wrap up around that, I wanted to just say like one of the things that people in general need to start doing. Don't think of philosophers or public figures, including myself, as the end all be all that you have to accept or understand. Like I don't. There is no Connorism. Do not like use that. I do not want that. But instead, look at these philosophers, these thinkers, these commentators as resources for you to use and learn and grow.
Well, and
And
you said earlier that a huge reason why people don't think about Jordan Peterson, why they think he's right, is he's already a genius. Why should I question what he says? But
yes,
that in and of itself ties into the anti-science, anti-reality methodology of competitive authoritarianism, of cult leader mentality, of all of those things in science, in the scientific community, where we make our where we try to make our stomping grounds. If you're a genius, that means that there's more reason to pour scrutiny onto your works. It means that there are more eyes on you. It means that you have to be more right, or more people will be there to see it. We're a nobody, so we can make all, we're a nobody and we're not known as a genius in the scientific community, so we can make all sorts of weird, spurious, wrong claims and then come back to them later and just kind of erase them from the books and pretend it didn't happen and be right later. But a genius, a real member of a pillar of the scientific community, if you do something wrong, everybody sees it and you have to answer for it. So if Jordan Peterson were being the scientist that he actually was trained and has a PhD in being, he would be being held a lot more accountable.
yeah, and I think to kind of wrap up on that, I do think one of the things that is really important for people to remember is
One
that
moment.
go ahead. I'll just address the other audience. One of the things I think people need to remember is that in academia, your ability to like maintain yourself is open to immense criticism, and your reputation is everything. Your ability to deal with certain facts is key.
Well, it's
And
not your
if you screw up,
reputation so much as it's your credibility.
yes,
Yeah.
your credibility. And one of the reasons I think Jordan Peterson has abandoned that is because he knows his ideas cannot stand up to public scrutiny or scrutiny in general, so he appeals to a select audience. And that is a
Yeah.
dangerous part.
And we see a lot of that with typical creationist religious propagandists. We see that a lot with political propagandists and far right and far left extremist groups. We see that a lot. That's a very common tactic.
So I wanted to thank you very much for joining me, and I would like to remind everybody that I am planning to do more videos like this. I really just couldn't get the computer working. My camera was a mess, and I didn't want to hide behind a blank screen. So if you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe once it is up in the VOD version on YouTube. And you can also look into my newsletter on The Progressive American on Substack. Thank you very much, man.
Thanks so much for having us.